Alrighty. So I'm gonna do a little more setup here. Get started. Turn my monitor around so I can see what you guys are seeing. Alright. So, I guess the name of the game today is that yesterday we got donated some computers. We got donated to some a couple weeks ago too, but the ones I was more excited about just came in yesterday. And so, we here at the Headwaters Science Center, we're a non-profit. We oftentimes are running several years behind as far as like the technology that we're running off of, just because of like financial constraints and like it not being an absolute necessity for us. And so a lot of the stuff that we operate here when it comes to computers and whatnot is stuff that gets donated to us by usually like local businesses, some individual stuff, that kind of deal. And so part of my job here is whenever we do get donated new computers, new whatever, part of my job is to go in and turn it into something we can use. And this one's going to be a pretty easy one. Like for what I've gathered on at least some of these, they seem like they're computers that we're just going to be able to plug right in and have operating better than what a lot of the staff here have at their desks to begin with. And so it should be pretty easy for us, but I've got a few to kind of sort through and make sure stuff's working in them. So I'm just going to be hanging out here. This is something I got to be doing at some point today or coming up anyway, so I figured might as well stream it. Call it educational content. I am an educator first and foremost. That's my first title. So, let me grab a couple things here. So one of the things I was kind of most interested about in regards to getting these new computers is that these are sort of a generation bump compared to what we had been using up until now. And so it just so happens that the person or business who donated these computers actually donated most of our prior generation of computers as well that we've been using a few years ago. And so this one here is one that actually just got donated, but it's got pretty much the same exact configuration of the computers that are at most of the desks here at HSC right now. But these ones are sort of the newer ones, also just donated yesterday, so we bought both these computers, just came in yesterday. But there's a difference between them. This one on my left is a newer computer, and I think it might be kind of worth talking about what it means to be a generation newer. You hear that sort of terminology a lot with computers, what does a generation mean? What is version 2, yada yada yada, what is all that stuff? And so I think just to start here, I think we'll sort of break down what's different here versus what's the same, because I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking oh, a new generation of stuff came out, I got to replace everything. There's a perception, I feel with computing in particular, where the turnover on the components are so fast that it's hardly worth keeping up with. And I think on some level that is kind of true, where you do have some stuff that turns over very, very, very frequently, but other stuff not so much. And so part of what I do here, when I get a computer like this that is of a little bit older configuration, realistically, I'm not putting this on somebody's desk. This is going to go down to the basement. But we're going to keep it. And we're going to keep it because, frankly, a lot of the stuff that's in it is still going to be usable, even though it is a little bit older. I mean, we can look at, the stickers on the front here. This one says 2016 on it, right? Yeah, 2016. This one says 2017. So only a year difference from when these computers were assembled, even though there's a generation shift that happens there. And like I said, not everything changes between. We have some actually computers that are, again, from this same place that are using a very similar configuration going all the way back to 2013 as the year that's onto them. And so I think a good place to start is talking about what stays the same here. So, like I said, generation shift happened here. This is an LGA 1150 board. So this is Intel system from like 2014 is when like these components would have like first come out. Whereas this is an LGA 1151 board. Same Intel, same company made it. It's just like the next generation of that board. So this is like 2016 technology versus 2014 technology, basically. And some, like I said, some stuff doesn't carry over, but a lot of stuff does. So let's talk about that. So this 2016 system, I already had one of my folks that helped me out here with some of this come through and strip some stuff out of it. And in particular, I pretty much do this with all computers that come in here. Is there's components in it that are like just generally like worth keeping, because a lot of the times you can, like I said, reuse them in other stuff. And so an easy one that to highlight that would be able to be found in pretty much every computer that, for the most part, like if it's a computer that came out in the last like 15 to 20 years, like you can just rip it out and plug it into a different thing and use it, and that's hard drives. And so this is a 2.5-inch SSD that comes out of, you know, would have been mounted right under here, but we removed it yesterday when we were kind of stripping it for components. Because, like I said, it's something that we can strip out and plug into something else and just use, and it's just valuable. You can plug this, something like this you can even put in, like most laptops, you can put a 2.5-inch hard drive in. So, like I said, probably like the most obvious thing that is in pretty much any computer that you can pretty easily just pull out and reuse and have like be valuable. And what the hard drive is basically the main storage for your computer. So anytime you install a program on it, including things like Windows, lives on your hard drive. And so this is a thing where this has, I know it has Windows installed on it. This is a hard drive that was for a staff person who's no longer employed here. But I could take this and I could plug this into a different tower and basically just see what her computer was when she quit working here. Like I could just, even though everything else changes, I can take the hard drive and put it in a different computer and see her desktop when I put this in there. So that's the hard drive. And they're not the most expensive component out there, so I think a lot of times people tend to just like not worry about them. But like for me, when I'm, you know, having to set up, you know, new laptops and stuff like that, and I'm working with a bunch of, you know, like I said, not very new kind of cast off components, a lot of the times having extra hard drives around is really handy, especially these SSDs, because with newer technology, the SSDs tend to run a lot faster than the old hard disks do. And so even if I do have like a thing that has a hard disk in it, a lot of times I'll be trying to swap it out for an SSD just because like it performs so much better. And so I'm always trying to get extras of those around. And so like these computers that we got here all came with SSDs in them. And so I've got a stack of like, let's see, like maybe 12 SSDs that just came in over the last like 2 weeks that are sitting on my desk, and I'm pumped about it. This is great. Lots of useful spare parts. Another thing that I always strip out of computers when I get them are these guys. So this is the RAM. And RAM is one of those things where, again, it tends to, for the most part, transition between computers relatively well. There are generational shifts that happen in RAM, and in fact, one of them happened here. So the sticks that I'm pulling out of this are what are called DDR3 RAM. I guess you can more or less think of them as like third generation RAM. And DDR3 is a format that was like the preeminent format of RAM from probably like 2005-ish, I would guess, all the way up until like 2015, 2016. And so, as I said, it's something where like if you have a bunch of computers that are of like a relatively similar vintage, they're probably all using the same generation of RAM, and you can swap them around pretty consistently. So like one of the things I do is like the towers that we had here all came with just like one RAM stick in them, but most of them have slots for two. And so one little like easy little performance bump I was able to give these, like this generation of computers when we got them, was basically just consolidating RAM from extra computers I had around into these, going from 4 gigs to 8 gigs of RAM. Is a pretty substantial difference in like the modern day, is when it comes to running things like Google Chrome and even like Windows. Windows uses a decent chunk of RAM. And so it's something that, like I said, it's a pretty easy component to tear out. Usually just is a couple little snappies that you got to unsnap and it pops right out. And so pulling that type of thing out is usually pretty worthwhile for me. Because like I said, I use it, and I've even run like, I mean, if you go way back, if you've been watching the streams for a long time, you'll remember I set up a DDR2 system a couple years ago that I just gave to my parents because they had an old computer that they hadn't updated since like 2003 probably, and I was like, hey, I got better than that in my junk pile down there. So we set up a DDR2 system for them, and they still use it to this day. So yeah, RAM is something else that I pretty much strip out of everything. Another one that I'll often strip out, and I kind of weirdly don't see very many people pull these out, I feel like. Because I'll buy like junk computers online a lot, or not online. I'll go to like secondhand stores and I'll buy like junk like 4 parts computers just to like strip components out of them. And a lot of the times the hard drives and the RAM are already taken out of them, just because like I said, they're pretty easy to take out. But one thing that I like pretty much never see anybody take out are these guys. And so this is a little battery, and it's just a little watch battery, a little coin battery. And these are for what are called the CMOS system. And so CMOS, it's an acronym, CMOS. I honestly don't know what it stands for off the top of my head. But basically CMOS is like the settings on your motherboard. And so this is the battery that like keeps like the internal clock of your computer going when it's unplugged. Like, it does that type of stuff for the motherboard, basically. So really, like, low computing power and things, but, that needs a power supply to, like, maintain itself a little bit. And these batteries can die over time, so it's, like, a component that needs to be swapped out every, like, now and then. Average lifespan for them is maybe 10 years or so. And so a lot of the times I'm dealing with a little bit older tech here. And so if I'm running a computer that got put together in 2013... like, hey, we're getting there, as far as like probably that CMOS battery needing to get swapped out at some point. And so whenever I get like new computers in, it's one of the first things I always go and pop out again, because it's easy. It's easy, and it's like a component that is useful, and it means I don't have to be buying packs of them ever, because I just have a stack of them, and I just have a drawer full of them like near my desk, that whenever something like that comes up, I can just swap it in. Plus they get used in other stuff too. We use like kitchen scales here that use them, so I will give them to that purpose. What else we got? Oh, of course. One of the most useful things that I get out of a lot of these computers, especially ones that I know I'm kind of going to just be junking, just going to be turning into scrap parts from the start, screws. The screws that computer components are attached with pretty much haven't changed, like, in decades as far as I can tell. And so having a bunch of extra screws around for, installing extra hard drives, or, oops, I dropped one and it got lost in the carpet, or yada, yada, yada. Like, I always have saved the screws whenever I'm taking out things like hard drives, for example. And so those are like the easy things to get out, like all the stuff that you're seeing here that I've been showing you, like these literal items, like I said, were taken out by not me, but by somebody who, is a volunteer at the Science Center that honestly had never done anything with computers at all until, maybe a month ago or so. And like I said, she's just been helping me like tear some stuff down, because we've been trying to move some of our scrap pile in the basement out. And so she's been helping me by just like tearing stuff down. But like I said, she's never done any of this until, several weeks ago. And like I said, if she came down here and I was like, yep, screwdrivers upstairs, get this, and this out of them. And she was able to do it successfully on her own without any oversight from me beyond that. And so, like I said, it's one of those things where people perceive it as being very, very complicated, but a lot of these parts, you know, they can come out pretty easy and get reattached pretty easily. And for the most part, the only tool you need is just a Phillips head screwdriver. Alright. So, when we're talking about like a generation shift happening in computers, it could apply to a lot of things. So, like I said, you could have a generation shift that happens with your RAM, which is, like I said, one of the things that has happened here is these newer ones have DDR4 RAM, so newer generation of RAM than what the prior ones had. And one of the things I actually like about RAM is that, like, the form factor of them as far as, like, the actual size of the stick itself doesn't change. So, like I said, you don't have to... You know, it's not like things like GPUs where they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger forever. Like RAM's pretty much been this size forever. But they do still change the form factor a little bit just to like help with making sure you understand what the compatibility is. And so one of the things you can see, if you look at these, and one of them's kind of dusty here, is that there's a little notch in each of them, right there and right there. And those notches don't line up with one another. Those notches line up with a little like piece of plastic that's like in the plug you put them in inside the computer. And if those notches don't line up, you can't install them. So if it's a DDR3 system, I like physically can't even put a DDR4 stick in it because those notches won't line up. And it's the same with the DDR2 and even going back to like original DDR RAM, like the physical form factor of the placement of that notch has changed every time, and it's an easy, quick way to be able to like tell the difference between two sticks just looking at them, like just at a glance. But also, like I say, keeps you from accidentally slotting DDR4 RAM in a DDR3 slot and getting confused as to why it's not working. The other thing that changes much more frequently, and so when people talk about like the generations of computers, a lot of the times you're sort of talking on the motherboard and processor end. And so that changes a lot more often. And so that's one thing where, like I said, I on some level agree that like the generation shifts happen a ton and happen in such a way that can be tough to keep up with. Nope. Need something?
Are you filming?
Yeah. No, I'm recording. We're live. Okay. And so, like I said, what we're looking at here is, like I said, a motherboard that is a generation newer. Like I said, a motherboard that is, the vintage on it would be 2016. Like I said, this system got put together in 2017, but the tech in it is like a year older than that. It's 2016 stuff, so LJ1151. Whereas these ones, like I said, these are 2014 is when this motherboard would have like first become available on the market, even though this system was put together in 2016. And in that context, like I could not swap. The big thing that's going to change between the generations of motherboards is what processors you can put in them. So the CPUs change, and so like I couldn't take the processor out of this computer and put it in this one, or vice versa. And so if you have an older processor, you can't put it in a new motherboard and get all the bells and whistles that come with that. Similarly, you can't put a new processor in an old motherboard and get extra performance out of it that way. You're kind of capped by that. And so when we're talking about like generations of computers, generations of processors, that's usually what we're talking about. So when you look at your laptop and, you know, see the like, you know, 8th gen core, whatever Intel processor in it, that's what it's referencing is... Let me rephrase that one. When you see that sticker, like you see 8th gen Core i7 or whatever, 10th gen, I guess they're on 13th gen right now. If you're going into a store right now and looking at a laptop that has like an Intel sticker on it that has a generation listed, it would be 13th, would be the most recent one. And those are talking about generations of processors, is what that means. That's talking about the CPU. And so we can actually, here, just for visual's sake, we'll pop. So the CPU lives underneath this, so this is the CPU fan, or CPU cooler, you'll hear them called sometimes. This one's very dusty. And so if you want to get access to your CPU, I would generally recommend not doing this if you don't know what you're doing, because getting it back on can be kind of a headache and you can mess it up in a way that can be damaging. But if we unplug the fan, here's another great component that honestly doesn't change very often is these fans. Like I could take this same fan and plug it into pretty much any Intel system from the last 15 years at least, and it would work fine. Underneath the CPU fan, you'll find a little handle here. And as you open that up, I'm going to set it down just because I don't want it to fall out, but basically you lift this up and the little bracket door around it opens up around it and gets you access to the CPU. Okay. And so you can see that little bracket there, how it lifts up. And what you're seeing in there now is the naked CPU socket. And so that's attached to the motherboard. So when I talk about sockets, that's what I'm referring to is this right here is the CPU socket. And so that's the thing that more or less is deciding your generations when it comes to motherboards, is what the CPU socket is, what types of chips it can take. So you'll have generations of CPUs that happen within generations of motherboards, though. And so when I said, you know, when you look at the sticker and it says X generation Intel on it, it's not exactly the same as the generation of motherboard. And so, for example, LGA 1150, what this motherboard is, can actually take Intel Gen 4 and 5, I think. CPUs can both go into LGA 1150. Yeah, it's 4 and 5 because this one is 6 and 7. So, similarly, like I said, there's 2 generations of CPUs that can go into this socket. There's 2 generations of CPUs that can go into this one. It's not always 2 to 1. Intel likes to do 2 generations per generation of motherboard, basically, but it doesn't always necessarily line up exactly that way. Okay. But another component that you'll see me take out of a lot of computers actually are fans. Because fans, like I mentioned with the CPU fan, are things that like don't change very often as far as like what the actual plugs are inside. And particularly with case fans, which was what you'd call these, the ones that are on the case, the computer case, basically have like a handful of like sizes that are relatively common. And beyond that, you can pretty much just swap them out into whatever system you want as long as you have mounting brackets that are the right size. And so these ones here, so we have a lot of computers that have the same cases, and so a lot of the times what I'll do, just in the context of like, hey, I have a lot of these cases that all have 1 fan in them, but they actually have 2 fan mounting brackets on them. A lot of the times I'll take ones out of systems that I'm confident I'm not going to be using and put them as a second fan into ones that I am going to be using. There's a couple reasons for that. One, it just like helps with cooling, and like we don't really have to worry too much about like overburdening our computers from like a thermal standpoint here. Like we're not running any applications that are like gonna be straining our computers so hard that they're gonna be getting like horrifically hot. But the other benefit of it is it actually helps a lot. I mean, you can see how dusty this fan is. But having multiple fans actually helps a little bit with like how dusty they'll get on the inside. And in particular, if you're just having one fan, sort of the typical allotment would be to just have just one exhaust fan because it helps more with like the heating. But one of the issues you'll encounter with having a single fan, especially having a single exhaust fan and no in fan, is that it creates a like negative pressure differential within your case in such a way that you end up with dust. So you suck all the air out of it, you end up with a case that has less air pressure inside of it than the air around it, so air works its way into everywhere else basically on the case, because these things obviously aren't airtight. And a lot of the dust that you see tends to come in with that. So your exhaust fan, yes, is pushing air out, but by pushing air out, it's encouraging air to come in through other vectors, particularly like this guy here. And so you'll see a lot of dust forming on the inside of cases that only have one exhaust fan. And so something like, if I have the extra fans laying around, I'd like to get 2 onto every system that we run here. And like I said, it's really never an issue for me because they're so like cross-generationally compatible. You know, this little header that you see on the end here, like I said, hasn't changed in ages. And so it's, like I said, literally just a matter of like, hey, do I have, what are these, like 90-something millimeter fans? Maybe just 90 millimeter fans here that, you know, as long as I have a bracket to put it in, I can use it. And then things like cables that are inside a lot of those haven't changed in a long time. So particularly one that I was having Angela tear out to were what we're calling the SATA power cable here. And so this is the thing that provides power to, in the case of these ones, it's providing power to the hard drive, but it also is the cable that you would have providing power to, like if we had like a disk drive in this computer, it would get power from like the same type of cable. And then the SATA data cables, we also keep, and so this cable provides power to something like a hard drive, but you also need to have a cable that like transmits information that's like a separate cable. And so that's what this guy is here, is the SATA data cable. And so this connects the hard drive to the motherboard. This is hard drive to power supply, this is hard drive to motherboard. And generally I'll rip both of those out of a system that I'm not planning on using. Because again, a lot of the times what we end up doing is putting like multiple hard drives into computers, because most of the SSDs that we get here are pretty small. And so they're useful for having like your Windows be installed on it. You'll get a much better performing system if you have your operating system installed on an SSD than on a hard disk. But the trade-off is that SSDs tend to be a lot more expensive for how big the storage is. So a lot of times they come to us very small, the ones we get access to, because again, we're getting them for free. And so like this one here is only a 64 gigabyte drive. Like I said, good for installing like Windows and then like Microsoft Office on it. But if you're trying to store photos on it, or, you know, I do like video editing stuff for us sometimes, I'm not going to be able to fit that on here. And so I have to have a computer that has like a few extra hard drives in it. And so I keep like, I have an SSD and I think 2 hard disks in mine at my desk that are just like there to just like be big storage for the sake of, like I said, storing like video assets and stuff like that. And so, but to do that, you also need to have cables for it. And so, like I said, when we get these types of computers in that I'm not planning on necessarily using, I'm like, yep, I'll take that, I'll take that, I'll take that as far as the cables go, so I can use them later for installing extra hard drives and whatnot. Alright, as far as I know, this computer is in a configuration that should just work when I press the button. I don't 100% know if it has Windows installed on it. So we might see a screen pop up that just says like, you know, hey, you don't have any operating system in this, please install one. That could happen, which is part of the reason why I brought this one down, is because I know this one has Windows on it. So, we're gonna try. And I'm using, I'm using A VGA cable is what I'm attaching here, so I'm taking this and I'm putting it in the back of this computer. So I have it coming down from the bottom of my monitor here. This is the VGA. And so VGA is a older format for video. It's analog video signal. I use it because I have a ton of them laying around, and the monitors we have here have vid on it. It's handy because this is, again, something that has, like, been relevant. Like, this is a format that's existed since, like, the 80s. And, like, a lot of stuff still comes with VGA on it. And so it's a handy one for us to have around here, especially with, like I said, dealing with as many like older systems as I have. A lot of times they come to us and they don't have an HDMI port on them or a display port on them. We deal with a lot of VGA and DVI here, which is what this one has. Like this computer, even though it's a pretty new computer, actually doesn't have an HDMI port on it. It's got VGA and DVI. And so we're running VGA today. And the big trade-off of VGA and DVI versus something like HDMI is VGA and DVI only do video, they don't do sound. So like HDMI, you're getting your sound and your video bundled together in one cable. VGA only does sound, or only does video. Same with DVI. So we're connected there. We of course have to have a mouse and keyboard. I found a couple down in the basement. A lot of times you can get away actually with not having a mouse, but it is not common to be able to run computers without a keyboard. You kind of, I mean, I guess I could maybe see it like maybe being able to get away with it on something that has like a touch screen, I guess, but you need some way to like interact with it. And so a lot of the times, I know like with older computers, a lot of times if you try and boot them up without a keyboard installed, they like won't even really let you boot up. And then where is power cable for my monitor, which I'll put in. I got a little power strip back here that I'm running off of. I did bring another power cable down for the tower. I don't know where I set it. Oh, there it is. Maybe we'll slide over a smidge here so I can reach my power strip a little more easily. And then for plugging in the power supply, so this thing here is our power supply in this system. And in this one it's mounted on top. A lot of times they'll be in the bottom and pointing out that way. Depends on the case, but pretty much always this cable, again, hasn't changed in as far as I ever remember. It's the standard AC cable. And then the power supply has a switch on the back to turn it on, so I have it off right now, so I gotta switch it on. Usually, like pretty much anytime I'm working inside the computer, I always turn that off. Just for personal safety reasons, but also for, like, you know, I don't want to, like, have static in there and shock something on accident. Like, I don't want to blow out a component. I've had that be an issue before, where I've had power supplies that have been bad and have destroyed components and computers I've been working with. And, ideally, here, let's turn this sideways. You can witness the boot just as I do. And so I'm going to push the button on the front here, and if everything's working, we should see fans start spinning. Should be the first kind of indicator that we're getting. Ooh, and we had lights. Lights and a fan. Perfect. Now, the question is, reboot. So, it says reboot and select proper boot device, or insert boot media and selected boot device and press a key. So, what that's telling us is the hard drive doesn't have Windows installed on it, which I was thinking may be the case, but good to know, confirmed. So if I want to run this, I'll have to install Windows on it, which is a pretty easy process. We're not going to do that today, but pretty easy process. And, like I said, I have a hard drive here that I know has Windows installed on it. And so we'll go through quick the process of swapping out a hard drive. Isn't that convenient? And so I turned off my power supply here. Like I said, anytime I'm working inside the guts of the computer, I always turn off the power supply. And then all I have to do is take out the SATA power cable. So it just pulls right off. And if you look at the end of this, my camera will focus, you'll see that the shape of like the ports on the end of this is sort of like a two-sided little deal. There's one little short one here, and then there's a little bit longer one, and they're both kind of L-shaped. And so they're kind of like two L's that are meeting kind of in the middle with their little foots there. And so the longer one is the power one, the shorter one is the data one. And so I'm taking the power one off, and I'm plugging it in to the power side here. Like that. And for the data cable, it has a little like metal clippy on it. You just gotta pinch and pull it out. Not complicated. And similarly, it's just gonna snap right in here. And I would mount it on here as well. Like there's screws, holes here for slotting a hard drive in and mounting it on. But because we're just kind of testing stuff out here to make sure stuff works, I'm not going to go through the process of getting the screwdriver out and doing all that. But now I'm going to turn the power supply back on. I'm going to hit the button again, and hopefully we'll probably see some message from the motherboard that is saying, oh no, we're just getting a Windows logo. Perfect. A lot of the times when you transplant one hard drive from one computer into another, especially one that's operating under a different set of configurations, a lot of the times there will be a moment where the hard drive has to say, hey, wait a minute, this is not exactly what I remember being. I'm in a different body right now. What's happening? This one hopped right in, though. And so right away, like I said, we're seeing there is a desktop. That is a desktop from one of our former employees here. And so, like I said, what that tells me is that basically everything in this computer is working perfectly fine. Because other than, it needs to have Windows installed on it. And so what this means, from my perspective, as far as like what I'm going to be doing over the next probably several days, is I'm going to be going through various people's desks here at the Science Center, taking their computers out of them, taking their hard drives out of them, and swapping out the blank hard drives that are in here for their hard drives that are on their current computers. Because like I said, I could have taken this and swapped this into this former staff person's computer here, and she probably wouldn't know the difference at all. The other thing I'm going to check here, and this is always a good thing to be doing once you are swapping components out, is you want to check and make sure everything's working correctly. And so I can look at this and I can press Control-Alt-Delete. So I'll do it again. I'll press Control-Alt-Delete. You select Task Manager. There's a tab at the top that says Performance. And from here, what I can see is, okay, there's the CPU, the processor, and I can look at that and I can see what model my processor is. So Intel Core i3-6100. So, yep, exactly what I thought it was going to be. So this is in fact, the model or build of computer that I was told it was going to be. Which, like I said, kind of lower mid-grade CPU from 2016. I can look in here and I can see, okay, there's 8 gigs of memory in here. Might have to double check that. I was thinking this one had 12 in it, but it might be 2 4 gig sticks instead of a 4 and an 8. But like I said, that's something where I didn't check it, but I know one of the other ones that I opened had 12 gigs in it, so I was expecting this one to have the same. So the fact that I'm seeing 8 here means that that's something I should go back and double check and make sure I don't have a bad RAM stick in one of the slots. Or that I didn't properly reseat the RAM stick that I took out, maybe. And then I can see the disk, the M4 CT, whatever is this, the hard drive I've got in there, and it's there and it's working and has the space that it should have. So I can look at that and say, yep, everything is working exactly as I would have expected it to with the setup I've got here. I am going to restart here though, because I am a little curious. Again, we've done a little generation shift here. And one of the things that happens sometimes with these is they'll change the software that the motherboards have on them. We talked about CMOS before. Because motherboards have some software on them. A lot of times you'll hear it referred to as BIOS, is sort of the proper name for the interface when you're manipulating things on your motherboard. And so, yep, so you can see right up there, MSI, click BIOS. So MSI is the company that made the motherboard. BIOS stands for the Basic Input-Output System, and so this is a place you can go and basically see all the stuff that's plugged into the motherboard, and you can a lot of times futz with some of the settings on it too. And so what I'm curious about is I want to see that RAM. So for example, I can look here and I can see the SATA ports. So this board has 4 SATA ports on it. These guys down here at the very bottom. And I can see SATA port 1 has nothing plugged into it. SATA port 2 has M4 CT06, which is my hard drive that's plugged into it. SATA port 3 has nothing, SATA port 4 has nothing. I can look in here and see, yep, nothing, our hard drive and nothing, so everything's checking out there. What I would like to find in here is a lot of the times they'll have a feature that's called Board Explorer or something similar to that, where you can actually look and see what ports have stuff plugged into them that it's registering. And so if you have something like a bad RAM stick, for example, or a bad hard drive, sometimes it just won't get detected by the board. And so you can see that in the Board Explorer, even if it is seated correctly, even if you've snapped it in correctly, it's not working because of something else. Sometimes you can tell that by looking at into BIOS. But it doesn't look like this BIOS has Board Explorer on it, which is interesting because it's a feature that I know this one has, and I think it's the same company that made both those boards. Let's see. Because yeah, I can see where it says physical memory here. I can see it has my 8,000 megabytes or 8 gigs. There's 1,000 megabytes in a gig. And so 8,000 megabytes is my 8 gigs, so it's there, and it tells me the speed of it too, 2,133 megahertz, which is slow for DDR4 RAM, but still better than DDR3. Yeah. Something else you can do in BIOS that is important. I talked about how a lot of the times will be running multiple hard drives in a system. It can sometimes happen where you have multiple hard drives plugged in that have Windows installed on them. And so one of the things you can do in BIOS is you can set its priority order for what it tries to, which instance of Windows it'll try and run first. And so you can prioritize, this one I can go all the way down to 13 different options. And so I have it set where boot option 1 is a hard disk, M4, CT, yada, 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 which is this. And so when I turn this on, it's going to look, the first place it's going to look for Windows is on this hard drive. And if it finds Windows there, it says, cool, we'll run it, and it's going to work. But if I were to have not that hard drive installed, it might it's going to look for that. And it's going to say, hey, I didn't find any windows there. So then it goes to option 2, checks there. If it still doesn't find it, it goes to option 3, yada, 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 is what you can set here, basically. And so, like I said, if you have multiple hard drives that have Windows installed on them, or if you are have like a Windows like disk or something, you can set the priority order for how you want it to, what order you want it to look for things when it's booting through BIOS. I'm just gonna exit out of here. I'm not gonna. Didn't really futz with anything in there, just checked a couple things. But like I said, it worked, and it worked exactly, basically how I had hoped it would work. But what I'm going to do now is I want to double check that RAM. I'm just going to press and hold my power button here to shut this off. I'm going to hit my power supply. And then I'm going to double check that RAM. A lot of the times if there's bad RAM plugged in, it just won't really boot at all. But, you know, it's not impossible that we, you know, seated it in such a way that it didn't take. So that one is a 1 4-gig stick. And that one's also a 4-gig stick. So yeah, it's correct. Just had different sticks in it than I thought it did. Like I said, I had the one I like pulled out yesterday when they first came in had one 4-gig stick and one 8-gig stick in it. And so I assumed they all had that, but it looks like this one only has 8 gigs in it total rather than having the 12. But that means the RAM is working perfectly fine. Everything in this computer seemingly is working great, other than it doesn't have an operating system installed on its hard drive. Which, like I said, no problem. Not worried about that at all. Honestly, a lot of the times I like having a fully, when it comes to stuff like this, I like having a fully blank slate to start with. Yeah. So, basically what we're going to do now is take this tower, disconnect it, and swap in these other ones, and we're just going to make sure everything is working here. Like I said, I'm going to hit my power supply, unplug my power, unplug my keyboard and mouse, unplug my VGA cable, all from the back of this computer here. And we'll set this one aside. And one I am curious about, this one came to us with a sticky note on it that says loud fan, or noisy fan on it. So I am curious about how noisy this fan is. You may recall that I removed a fan from this one, and part of the reason I was doing that was I was thinking I may want to swap them out if this one is in fact noisy enough to warrant a sticky note. And so, first thing I'm taking off here is there's just a couple thumb screws on the back that allow me to remove the back panel of these computers, which is pretty typical. Sometimes you need a Phillips head, but a lot of times, as far as like taking the side panel off, it's just a thumb screw. Sometimes it'll be like a little handle thing too. Holy moly, that one's dusty. Get this guy out of the way too. Alright. Wonder if this will show up on camera. My coffee. Cover my coffee for this one. That'll maybe make your fan be noisy. Six years of office worker gunk. Probably sitting down on the floor too. So, first things first, now that I've recognized a discrepancy that apparently exists in some of these, is the amount of RAM. So I'm going to check my RAM sticks here. I guess I'll show you how that works. So the RAM, we have some little bit of a rat's nest of cables in this one, but the RAM is right here. And when you're taking them out, there's just some little snappies, some little snap clips on either side. Pretty much always is right next to the CPU or your RAM sticks, but if you unsnap the snaps, like I said, they pretty much just pull right out. And so this one has two 4 gig sticks as well, so when we boot it, we're hoping to see 8 gigs in our system. I guess the other thing I didn't think about is noisy fan. I was thinking it was a case fan, but it could be the CPU fan. It could be the noisy component as well. Which is still swappable for me. I mean, I guess I literally just took one out of that other system, but they are a little bit more of a headache to get in and out. Oh, well. I/O shield is not snapped in all the way either. So, when I say the I/O shield, I mean there's like a little metal plate that'll come with your motherboard that has like the holes cut in the back of it for all the ports. So all these ports that you're seeing in the back are attached to the motherboard. And so the motherboard, when you get them, will come with this metal plate. And these are pretty much always like the same size. The like shield itself, but the like cutouts will be different because the ports, not all motherboards have the same ports in the back, and even if they do have the same or similar ports, they don't always have them in the exact same places. So the I/O shield is something that you kind of gotta have from motherboard to motherboard. Like I said, every time I've bought a motherboard, it's come with one, so. Nothing too crazy to have to worry about. Keyboard. No, that was the mouse. Here's the keyboard. So you've got a little bit of a janky port there. And then power supply. Turn it on. Seen red lights already, which is interesting. So I haven't hit the power button yet. And you do see that sometimes where, like, as soon as you power them on, they'll be like, oh, time to go. But interestingly, with this one, I haven't seen yet anything happen on our monitor. If you'll recall, even with the last one where the hard drive wasn't plugged in, or the hard drive didn't have Windows on it, it still like woke up and told me, hey, you need Windows. But I haven't seen anything pop up on this monitor yet. So maybe we'll hit our reset button here, let it start over, see if it does anything this time. Pretty much always worthwhile to check that type of stuff twice. Still nothing. Well, let's try. Oh, wait a minute. Something else kind of interesting I just noticed. The little LED light that indicates the power button turning on is also not on. So I hit the power button and the fans come on, but there's a little LED that's supposed to come on here that is not turning on when I hit it on this one. Which might indicate that some of our internal connectors are not connected properly. Or it could just have a burnt out LED. So the button seemingly is working, it's just the light that's not. Completely possible as well. So, I'm going to look at these guys here. And so these are the front panel connectors. Longtime fans will know that I have a extensive history of not getting along with these guys. Because they're kind of a pain in the butt, because it's a bunch of really little pins that are kind of hard to get slotted in when I have big hands like me. And so it always takes me a while. One thing I'll give credit to this board for is it is broken up into, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate little like plugs that you gotta plug in, but they're all in really tight like conditions next to each other on like one port basically. And so one thing I'll give credit to this board for is it has a map on it as far as like what order they got to be plugged in on. A lot of times they don't include that, and I gotta go look it up to make sure I'm putting them all in the right spots within their little port. Honestly, I have no idea why they separate them like this. Like, I've never seen them need to be in like a different order. Like the front panel connectors are always the same. So I don't know why they, like I said, separate them into 5 separate little plugs instead of just making it one plug that you can plug in. But that's how they do it. And like I said, at least this one has the courtesy of having like a little guide thing right next to the port, so I know which ones I'm working with here. And again, when I hit the power switch on the back, everything just, the motherboard booted right up. Which, like I said, is not typical. I have seen it happen. It's not typical, and I'm still not seeing any power on this one. There's a little buzz coming out of that case fan, but it's not too bad. But most notably, I'm still not getting any input or any signal on my monitor here indicating that we've turned this computer on, even though it is running. The fans are going. I'm not getting any visual out of it. So this is one that maybe needs a little bit more attention. And so it could be that the front panel connectors are bad. It could be that the port for the front panel connectors on the motherboard is bad. Could be a bad VGA port. I would expect that's probably not my VGA cable that's the problem, because I just used it successfully on that other computer. But something is not jiving quite right on here. So I'm going to set this one aside. I'm not going to sit and do this for the cameras right here, right now. But I'll set this one aside, and this is going to be one for me to take a second look at later. So power it down, start unplugging stuff. Because it also has a DVI port, and so even if the VGA port is bad, it still could be completely usable for us, because we actually have most of our desks run DVI anyway. I'm using VGA today just because I found a VGA cable before I found a DVI cable when I was digging through my cable drawer, but... Alright. Next. So again, just taking out the thumb screws. Setting them in my little thing over here. Ooh. So this one, little different configuration again. So we're seeing a different power supply than the last two. So the other ones had a 450 watt power supply. This one only has a 430, which is still plenty for what we're doing here. So this is the same power supply that like the older generation ones had in it. It's the 430. The hard drive's in a different spot, and the other ones, the hard drives was hanging underneath and was in this sort of hanging port under here, and here they've got them stacked up in the little metal carrier thing here. Also, a blue SATA cable this time. Why? I don't know. But SATA cables come in a million different colors. Like, you open up, that's one of those drawers that's like kind of just a fun one to open up, because, ooh, is it a different hard drive as well? Yeah, it's orange on top. So, different hard drive in this one. This one's weird. All sorts of different stuff. It's also much cleaner than the other ones I've opened so far have been. So, checking that RAM again, just making sure. So, it's got a 4 gig stick, and, whoops, and an 8 gig stick. So, this one has 12. This is maybe the one I opened initially when they got here. This one, we should see 12 gigs of RAM in it once we're booted up. And I think the last ones, the hard drives that are in them, I think are 120 gigs, if I'm not mistaken. So if we have a different model of hard drive in this one, we might see a different number as far as the size of the storage. Well, I guess we're not going to see it regardless, because I'm going to be plugging that little 64 gig one in anyway, just to have a Windows install. Right. And keyboard. Maybe. Keyboard. My keyboard has a USB that is a little crooked on it, so it fights me a little bit when I'm putting it in. Keyboard and mouse. Plug in a VGA here. Plug in our VGA. Power supply, and hit the power. And so you'll see that one, when I hit the power, a bunch of lights and fans didn't kick on, which is what is more normal. But hopefully it'll happen when I hit the button. Okay. Fans are on. Still no light, interestingly enough. But the fans kicked on and the lights on the motherboard kicked on, and I have a visual here. And it's telling me, hey, I don't have Windows installed. But, he said, interestingly, no light to be found on the front on this one either. Which is something I didn't think to check on the first one, to be honest. But, because I didn't really think of it as a thing to look at until I started seeing problems. But I wonder. So, plug in that hard drive. Hit the button. Oh, now it did turn on. Now there is an LED there. The blue one. And we should see a Windows logo. Maybe. Pro Series. Oh, it just went straight to BIOS. That's interesting. Which sometimes you do see, like I said, when you're transplanting hard drives between, a lot of times they'll just say, hey, this is weird. Let's take you to BIOS quick here, make sure everything is as we expect it is. Now let's try it again. You just gotta ask me to green light it, say, hey, I know this is kind of a goofy situation, something's different here. Let's just make sure everything's okay. And you say, yep, go right ahead, and it'll be fine. Still booted me into BIOS. Oh, interesting. And what we're seeing here, as an intrigue, we have, well, first off, we have our 12 gigs of memory that are right here, 12 gigs of RAM. But if we look at our SATA ports, SATA port 1 not present, 2 not present, 3 not present, 4 not present. That's not what I should be seeing, because I do in fact have something plugged into SATA port 4 is the one that I have this hard drive plugged into. And so we should be seeing that hard drive in SATA port 4. So the fact that it's not getting connected, or not being detected, sorry. Go back to our factory defaults here as far as our settings. I assume it was already on that, but just to make sure. And we'll try resetting again. And there's Windows. So one of the other things that can sometimes happen when computers are getting unplugged or powered down, especially like Windows 10 systems, when you're shutting them down, a lot of times they don't really shut down all the way. You're really putting them into sort of a sleep mode. Because Windows still run updates and stuff overnight, especially. So you shut it down, but it still is sort of on, so it can boot up and do its update stuff during downtime. But what that means is when you do things like unplug them, for example, they're not getting they're not really getting a proper shutdown. And so sometimes they're a little finicky when they come back on because they didn't get shut down properly. And that's maybe what happened here. We have this issue actually a lot of times with our stream computer because it's on a cart. And so we roll it out, we plug it in wherever we need to go. And then when we are done with it, we unplug the whole cart and tuck it back away somewhere. And so when we plug it back in, sometimes it has issues booting back up if it didn't get its whole shutdown process done properly. But check our processor. i3-6100, 12 gigs of RAM, yada yada yada, perfect. Everything seemingly is running perfectly fine there. Let it shut down. And then I'll do one more here in the back. And then I maybe gotta go talk to Lee. Hey. You're curious as to who I was chatting with there a while ago, briefly off camera. That was Lee, our executive director. And I told him I was live. He said, "Oh, come look for me later," which probably implies he's got something he wants to tell me. You're gonna go over here because I know you work. And final one here. Oops. And we're seeing right away another 450 watt power supply, so back to a little more normal here. 250 gigabyte hard drive, which is maybe what the other ones had too. I don't remember. I'll have to go back and check that. I know the older ones had 120s, but maybe these ones all had 250s and I didn't notice it. 2 RAM sticks. Wouldn't it be great if it was 2 8 gigs? Wouldn't that be exciting? Nope, 1 4. And 1 4. So 8 gigs total in this one. So a little trouble getting that RAM back in just because there's cables kind of I'm having to work around. A lot of the times when you're like building these systems from the ground up, you put your RAM in before you actually put your motherboard into your tower a lot of the time, so you don't have to worry about all the cables and stuff. And it's not impossible to deal with. It's not even like that big of a headache, but it does make it a little easier when you're building. Bring it back in. I'm not even going to bother checking this hard drive to see if it has Windows on it. Just going to start right away. Plug it in here. Keyboard, mouse, VGA. Then generally I always plug the power in last too. Again, just so I don't have to worry about, like, hey, if I'm digging around in a screwdriver, I don't have to worry about shorting something or anything like that. Power plugged in, power supply turned on, and power button works. And the question is, are we going to see... Oh, here's our motherboard, and there's our Windows. So, again, assuming all the RAM gets detected, that's sort of the last thing you got to check here. Seems like I got 3 systems that are working basically exactly as expected, and then the one over there is a little, probably needs a little more work. So the motherboard seemed like it was booting up fine, but we weren't getting a display out of it, which could be any of a number of things. It could be, they said, a bad VGA port on it. We know it's not the cable, we know it's not the port on the monitor, because we just saw it work with 2 other ones afterwards. It could be a bad RAM stick, sometimes that'll mess with the display, but usually when it's going to be an issue with the RAM stick, it'll boot up for a second and then quit working, in my experience. But I have also had it so that like you just don't get a display out if there's a bad RAM stick. But like I said, I got to futz with that one a little bit more and do a little troubleshooting on it. And here, i3-6100, 8 gigs of RAM, we're all set. Alright. I am going to sign off there then. Thank you, handful of people, for sitting here and watching me for the last hour and 15 minutes do this. Like I said, we used to do a lot more of these live streams. Maybe you'll start doing more of them again. Now probably isn't exactly the time to expect a lot more because we're coming into field trip season. But, you know, keep looking out for them. We'll keep doing them. Probably just not on the same regular basis as we were this time, you know, a year ago or 2 years ago. But, again, I enjoy them. I know a lot of the other staff enjoy them too, and hopefully you guys enjoy them as well. So thank you guys for watching. The Headwaters Science Center is open 7 days a week. We're open 9:30 to 5 on Monday through Saturday, and then 1 to 5 on Sundays, so come by after lunch on Sunday. And yeah, buy membership, come visit us, give us money. We like that.